difficult was this role?
It's a movie about a relationship between two people, and it was always the question of how can we have a movie with two people when one of the persons in it doesn't want to be with anyone.
He spent his whole life avoiding any mention of Redford. But then, with just one sentence at the age of 88, he left all of Hollywood in silence. At the memorial for his late friend Dustin Hoffman stood still before the microphone and said, his voice trembling but resolute, "I was jealous of him, and that jealousy destroyed our friendship." That sentence was not only a late confession, it also revived a story that had been hidden for decades. A story about two men who were once as close as brothers, who shared the spotlight, the films, and even the quiet moments behind the scenes. Yet no one ever understood why they suddenly drifted apart, choosing to remain silent for half a century, as if they had never known each other. And now at 88, Dustin Hoffman has chosen to break that silence to reveal the truth he has kept hidden all his life. What really happened between Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford? Why did two men once bound like brothers end up silent like strangers for half their lives? In the mid-1940s, on the sun-soaked coast of California, a boy named Robert Redford grew up to the sound of the waves and the golden afternoons of Santa Monica. A gentle mother, a strict father, a model middle-class family taught Redford early how to walk tall among the crowd. Handsome, athletic, and easygoing, he was the kind of man Hollywood seemed to have been waiting for. At Venice High School, Redford was called the Boy of the Sun, a good tennis player, a talented painter, and someone who made others believe his life could only go upward. However, after enrolling at the University of Colorado in 1954, life didn't go according to plan. Alcohol parties and a longing for freedom cost Redford his scholarship and eventually his place at the university. In 1956, he wandered through Paris, Florence, and Madrid, painting and living off spare change, realizing that art wasn't confined to silent canvases, it was the breath of human life itself. Returning to New York, Redford traded his paintbrush for a script and enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, where he learned to control his emotions. Every gesture, every glance had to carry weight. He didn't yet know that this calm restraint would one day make the whole world fall silent whenever he appeared on screen. Around the same time, in another corner of Los Angeles, another boy was growing up in completely different circumstances. Dustin Hoffman, born in 1937 to a poor Jewish family, learned early what it meant to live in cramped apartments and quietly listen to his parents discuss rent money. If Redford was the ideal model, Hoffman was the odd one, out small, not photogenic, with a trembling voice and anxious eyes. While his friends dreamed of becoming stars, Hoffman only dared to dream of standing on stage, even as a nameless extra. He did whatever it took to survive, selling goods, washing dishes, waiting tables at New York cafes where he moved in the late 1950s with only $20 in his pocket. By day, he rushed to auditions. By night, he slept on friends' couches, living on one thing alone, the belief that if he was truthful enough, the audience would see it. He once said, "I don't have the looks of a star, so I have to make people believe in the soul of the character." That was the moment amid failure, when an actor was truly born. Meanwhile, on the other side of America, Redford was living a life so perfect it almost seemed suspicious. With his striking looks and confident demeanor, he quickly became a Hollywood favorite. While Hoffman struggled on the off-Broadway stage, Redford starred in plays like Barefoot in the Park and Sunday in New York, taking his first steps into the A-list. If Hoffman expressed himself through fire, Redford mastered the art of hiding emotion behind a smile. One burned, the other froze. They both passed through New York. Both tried their hand at small roles, but never crossed paths. Two paths, one bright, one struggling, kept running parallel, seemingly destined never to meet. But Hollywood fate has a cruel sense of humor. In 1976, when America was still trembling in the aftermath of the Watergate scandal, a film project titled All the President's Men was launched. And it was that very film, with the two leading roles given to Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman, that brought those two opposing worlds onto the same stage, where light and shadow finally met. When their paths seemed destined never to cross, fate in the form of cinema did what no one expected. In 1976, director Alan J. Pakula began production on All the President's Men, a film recreating the Watergate scandal that had shaken American politics. By then, Robert Redford was already a major star, not only starring in the film, but also serving as its producer. And it was Redford himself who insisted on casting Dustin Hoffman, the stage actor widely respected, but often labeled difficult to work with in the other lead role. Their first meeting took place at the Warner Brothers offices in Los Angeles on a hot June afternoon. Redford arrived in a crisp white shirt, radiating his usual confidence. Hoffman came late, hair messy, shirt untucked, holding a cup of cold coffee. The two men looked at each other, and for a moment the whole crew fell silent, not out of tension, but because it felt like watching two magnetic poles collide. Redford extended his hand. Hoffman took it, and Pakula later recalled, "I knew instantly there was going to be something special between them." During the early days of filming in Washington, D.C., the two quickly found their rhythm. Redford was the embodiment of discipline, punctual, meticulous, following every step with precision. Hoffman was the complete opposite, always wanting to redo, to experiment, to tear apart every line of dialogue. At one point, Pakula exclaimed, "Robert finishes a scene in one take. Dustin might do 10 and still not be satisfied." Yet strangely, instead of clashing, their differences began to complement each other, fitting together like two mismatched but perfect puzzle pieces. Whenever the director called cut, Redford would smile softly, step aside, and light a cigarette. Hoffman would pace back and forth, talking nonstop about how the light hit his face. They often argued passionately, red-faced and fiery, only to burst out laughing together minutes later in the makeup room. A crew member once said, "I've never seen two men who could fight like enemies and laugh like brothers on the same day." Amid the intense filming schedule, they began sharing dinners, talking about politics, their craft, and the private thoughts few in Hollywood ever dared to reveal. Redford once admitted, "He keeps me on my toes." And Hoffman replied, "He gives me a sense of calm, something I rarely feel." When All the President's Men premiered, it became an instant phenomenon. The names Redford and Hoffman appeared everywhere, not just as stars, but as a symbolic duo. Audiences loved their chemistry, one cool, one fiery, one distant, one disarming. Together they created what critics called the perfect cinematic chemistry. And yet, even at the height of that brilliance, another feeling quietly began to grow between them, something no one ever spoke of, but everyone sensed. A friendship as close as brothers, bound tightly, yet within it ran a thin, invisible thread of jealousy, weaving through every glance, every smile, every word of praise. And that very friendship over the years slowly turned into a burden that neither of them dared to speak about. After the huge success of All the President's Men, Hollywood went crazy for the golden duo Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman. Two completely opposite men, one calm, one impulsive, one cool, one fiery, created a chemistry that audiences couldn't look away from. They appeared together at premieres, walked red carpets side by side, sat next to each other in front row seats of honor. The cameras always found them Redford with his soft smile, Hoffman with his burning gaze, and those images, intentional or not, carried a kind of intimacy that made people stop and stare. Then, one April evening in 1976 at the film's New York premiere, fate intervened. When a reporter asked about the pressure of working together, Hoffman leaned in and whispered something that made Redford laugh, a rare, genuine laugh that seemed to light up the whole room. That moment was captured by a Variety photographer, and the very next day the photo appeared on newsstands everywhere with a teasing headline. Is there something more than friendship between them? That was when everything began. At first, both men laughed off the rumors. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Hoffman joked, "If loving your colleague is a crime, then I must be the biggest criminal in Hollywood." The half-serious, half-playful remark became a headline, and by the next day, tabloids like National Enquirer and Hollywood Insider had turned it into a full-blown firestorm, a friendship beyond limits. Redford and Hoffman's secrets behind the Watergate set. They thought silence would make it go away. But in a world of cameras and suspicion, silence is fuel. The more they refused to speak, the more convinced people became that something was being hidden. A photo of Redford putting his arm around Hoffman at the 1977 Golden Globes was blown up and printed on the cover of People magazine captioned, "A friendly gesture" or something more. Redford, who hated attention, began to withdraw. He no longer smiled comfortably when cameras turned toward him. Hoffman, outwardly calm, was reportedly losing sleep, avoiding newspapers and snapping irritably during interviews. Once, when a journalist bluntly asked, "Are you in love with Robert Redford?" Hoffman laughed, but his eyes dimmed. "No, I just love what we created together." It was an honest answer, but in Hollywood's world of calculation, it was twisted into something else. Amid the swirl of rumors, there were still rare moments of quiet protection. One assistant recalled that during a press conference in Beverly Hills, when reporters surrounded Hoffman with questions about their special relationship, Redford quietly stepped in, placed a hand on his friend's shoulder, and whispered, "Let them write. They need stories. We don't." Hoffman simply nodded, but from that day on, no one ever saw them share a genuine laugh in front of the cameras again. Rumors didn't kill their friendship overnight, they just slowly eroded it. Each article, each photo, each half-joking question was like a tiny blade cutting into something they had once protected with absolute trust. As time passed, the distance between them grew. When Redford began directing and Hoffman buried himself in tormented roles, their meetings became fewer, then stopped altogether. In Hollywood, people still called them a pair of actors born to stand side by side. But in reality, a heavy silence now stood between them, one too thick for either to cross. And after all the gossip, the exaggerated photos, and the cruel headlines, only one thing remained certain: what had once been Hollywood's most beautiful friendship had become a wound both men carried in silence. But the real reason for their distance wasn't in the rumors, it lay in a deeper, truer, and far more painful hurt than anyone ever imagined. Because after the storm of rumors passed, what remained between them wasn't resentment. It was a void where pride, ego, and unspoken affection quietly wrestled. From being so close that words were unnecessary, they became two names that existed side by side only in print, not in life. And from that silence, their paths finally split, each carrying half of the bond that once made Hollywood stand still in admiration. After All the President's Men, Hollywood assumed they would share the screen many more times. But no, when the film ended, so did a chapter of their lives. Robert Redford took a new path, one of light fame and responsibility. Dustin Hoffman, as always, chose the winding, difficult, and lonely road. By the late 1970s, Redford had turned to directing. He made gentle yet profound films like Ordinary People and A River Runs Through It, then founded the Sundance Institute, paving the way for a new generation of independent filmmakers. Redford became the ideal figure, handsome, successful, principled, the kind of man America wanted to believe in. The press called him the last noble soul of Hollywood. Meanwhile, Hoffman, once hailed as the acting genius of his generation, dove into darker, more complex roles. From Kramer vs. Kramer to Rain Man, he became flawed, sensitive, and often difficult characters. His obsession with perfection turned into a reputation for being temperamental, arrogant, hard to work with. Behind the scenes, people would say, Hoffman doesn't act, he lives it maybe too much. Two men, two paths, one celebrated as an icon, the other labeled difficult. As Redford graced red carpets with ever more honors, Hoffman quietly faded into his own shadow. But what hurt most wasn't the distance of fame or geography, it was the distance in their eyes. At award ceremonies, when cameras found them, they still smiled politely, but their eyes no longer met the way they used to. At the 1982 Oscars, cameras caught the moment Hoffman turned away as Redford passed by. A brief nod averted gaze enough for keen viewers to sense that something between them had broken beyond repair. Mutual friends said that in the 1990s, whenever someone mentioned Redford's name, Hoffman would fall silent. Silent for a long time. Not angry, not bitter, just quietly sad. The man he once knew so well that he could finish his sentences had become just a name that made his heart ache. And Redford. When asked about Hoffman, he always answered with measured grace. I respect him. After all, we created something memorable together. No bitterness, no nostalgia, just a short sentence that sounded like a quiet farewell. In the 2000s, as Redford immersed himself in Sundance and Hoffman appeared less often, they were rarely seen together. It was as if both silently agreed that staying quiet was the only way to preserve what little remained untouched from their past. Then one day they happened to cross paths at an art fundraising event in Beverly Hills. Amid the crowd, Hoffman stood still, watching Redford walk onto the stage here, now silver, still wearing that calm, familiar smile. When Redford turned back, their eyes met for a brief moment. No words were spoken, just a slight nod as if to say, I still remember. Then they walked past each other quietly, politely but distant, like two men who once belonged to entirely different worlds. After that night, Hoffman went home late. A friend recalled that he sat in front of the TV for a long time watching an old 1976 interview, the one where he and Redford laughed together while reminiscing about all the president's men. When the friend asked, "Do you ever want to see him again?" Hoffman simply replied, "I'm afraid I wouldn't know what to say anymore." Two men who had once been as close as brothers could now speak to each other only through old articles and memories on film. For nearly 2 decades, they kept silent, a silence both proud and painful, like a scar that doesn't bleed but throbs whenever someone brushes against it. And then, when Robert Redford passed away, Dustin Hoffman finally broke that wall with a confession that left the world choked with emotion. In September 2025, news of Robert Redford's death swept through Hollywood. No warning, no long illness. Just one morning, he slipped away in his sleep at his home in Sundance. That day, Hoffman was in Los Angeles on the small set of an independent project. When his assistant stepped up and whispered, "Robert Redford has passed," he simply nodded, saying nothing. But seconds later, his eyes reddened, and he turned away so no one would see. A crew member recalled, "He stood there motionless for 5 minutes, then put down the camera and went outside for a cigarette. No one on set dared to speak." That night, Hoffman went home, turned on his old TV, and watched a 1976 interview where he and Redford laughed together, talking about Watergate. In the middle of the night, he scribbled a few lines in his notebook. Maybe I didn't say enough. 3 weeks later, he appeared at the memorial in Sundance, where he decided to say what, for half a century, he had not dared to say to his friend. In the late afternoon in Sundance, Utah, a cool breeze slipped through the wooden windows of the small hall where the memorial was held. Soft amber light fell across black and white photographs of Robert Redford lining the aisle, a young Redford, on set a smiling Redford backstage, a Redford standing amid the hills. In the front row sat his family old colleagues, a few young directors he had championed. The press had been asked to keep shutter clicks to a minimum, but lenses still followed silently. And then Dustin Hoffman appeared, hair snow-white dark suit, a touch loose at the shoulders, left hand bracing the lectern, right hand gripping a wrinkled sheet of paper. He paused as if to gather breath, then looked up at the largest portrait of Redford, hanging front and center. The host in a barely raised voice began, "If you could say one last thing to him, what would it be?" The hall seemed to swallow the light and fall utterly still. Hoffman bowed his head. 10 seconds. 20. 30. The faint rustle of paper was the only sound. An actress in the second row gripped her armrest. The lighting manager unconsciously dimmed the levels another notch. Reporters in the back raised their cameras and then lowered them again as if afraid to shatter the fragile moment taut in the air. Hoffman lifted his head, voice low and hoarse. "I'm sorry. I was jealous of him. And that's what killed our friendship." No murmur, only a breath released somewhere, and then held. He paused, swallowed his eyes glassy behind thin lenses. "Robert once pulled me out of a storm in this business. He said, 'I believe in you when all of Hollywood doesn't.' I never said those words back to him." In the fourth row, a silver-haired director passed a tissue to the person beside him. At the back, a cameraman lowered his lens, reminding himself not to shoot this. He unfolded the paper, then didn't read it. One night after a screening of Ordinary People, Robert called me. I didn't pick up. 3 days later, he sent a small card. "I wish you were here." I never replied. The words fell onto the wooden floor like small pebbles. A female reporter taking notes suddenly stopped looking up as if to confirm to herself that she had heard correctly. In the right corner of the hall, the Redford family's press officer shifted slightly to block a harsh light from Hoffman, a small gesture that somehow warmed the whole row. Hoffman exhaled hard, not to summon courage, but as if to push out what had weighed on his chest for decades. He spoke slowly, measuring each word I used to think I only admired him. Today, I understand. Maybe I cherished him more than I dared admit. Not romantic love. The kind of bond that makes you want to be close and afraid of being seen through. In the family section, someone nodded gently. In the press area, a few shutters flickered and then went dark. The photographers understood this was a moment to listen, not to hunt. He closed his eyes for a beat, then looked straight at the smiling portrait of Redford. I spent my whole life trying to prove I was different from him. But in the end, I only wish we could sit together once more like those two guys who laughed till we fell over in the makeup room in 1976. A sigh rose from the back row belonging to no one in particular. The host gripped the mic without speaking. In the wings, a technician froze with his hand on the fader, letting the silence carry its own weight. Hoffman folded the page slowly, as if settling a debt come due. "I learned this too late," he said, voice thick, "that sometimes jealousy is just how we hide our truest feelings." He didn't bow. He simply laid his palm on the lectern, tapped it twice in farewell, then stepped back. The whole hall rose almost as one, but no one applauded. Not out of doubt, but because they understood some truths once spoken must be wrapped in quiet. As Hoffman stepped off the last stair, the press section hesitated. A young reporter prepped a question, then closed her notebook, whispering to herself, "Later." A major outlet messaged its editor, "Keep the headline soft. This isn't for sensationalizing." In the foyer, TV cameras waited, but the lead producer signaled to film only the exits, not to crowd him. The memorial continued with a brief violin piece, the melody climbing the timbered ceiling and dissolving into the evening sky like a farewell. When the doors opened, Hoffman walked down the photo-lined corridor. He stopped at an image of Redford in a snowy forest, wearing the faintest smile, the kind not meant for cameras. No one photographed that moment. The only person nearby turned away, letting him have a small island of privacy after years of avoidance. And in that instant, everyone present understood what Hoffman had said wasn't to seek forgiveness, but to restore a rightful place to a relationship long misread by lights and headlines. As he left the hall, a cold porch wind fluttered his coat hem. Behind him, the music ended, and the murmurs returned soft, as if afraid to break something delicate. Editors on Wall Street and Sunset Boulevard began to type, but that day their words came gentler, slower. No one wanted to interpret anymore. The story had been told by the man who lived it without ornament, without defense, just the honest fragility of someone once considered one of Hollywood's strongest men. And from that moment on, people understood that the truth Hoffman had carried unspoken for half a century wasn't about guilt, it was about vulnerability. The last thing left when fame, pride, and silence have run their course. The question that followed was no longer who was right, who was wrong, but what they had left each other after the lights. Robert Redford rests in Sundance, the place where he devoted his life to nurturing art, where every brick and every tree bears the touch of a man who believed cinema could redeem the world. Outside, snow blanketed the wooden roofs. Inside, the memorial lights still washed over a photograph of his gentle smile like the last streak of sunlight in a day. Hundreds of miles away in Los Angeles, Dustin Hoffman sat in his small home, an old piano against the wall, an unfinished script open on the table. He looked out the window where dusk slid over red-tiled roofs and whispered, "He was the only one who made me believe there is still real friendship in Hollywood." His voice was rasping as if it had risen from the deepest place in his chest. Beside him lay an old notebook, the last page half filled with a line. "If I could go back, I would pick up the phone." Their story closed, but its echo did not. Because what they left behind was not only film's roles and glory, it was a lesson in envy, forgiveness, and the kind of friendship that survives even when silence has lasted half a century. Two men, one still alive, the other, now a memory, continue to walk side by side somewhere between the light and the shadows of Hollywood. And perhaps in this noisy world, there remains a friendship that never truly ended. If you too believe that behind every legend lies an untold truth, then like, share, and subscribe to join me as we continue to step into the stories behind the spotlight, where the true selves of these icons finally come to light.